On a crisp autumn morning in a small town in Pennsylvania, the local branch of Heritage Trust Bank was bustling with its usual morning activity. Through the glass doors walked Robert Chen, dressed in casual jeans and a red baseball cap. His appearance was unremarkable, just another local businessman making his routine deposit. The branch manager, Thomas Wilson, was having a particularly stressful morning. 3 employees had called in sick, the computer system was acting up, and the line of customers seemed endless. When he spotted Robert in his casual attire and hat, his frustration got the better of him. As Robert waited patiently in line, thumbing through some documents, he couldn't help but notice the sideways glances and whispers from Thomas's desk. After 20 minutes of waiting, while others who arrived after him were called to the manager's office, Robert finally approached the front desk. "I'd like to discuss some business matters," Robert said politely, holding his portfolio. Thomas barely looked up from his computer. "Sir, for business inquiries, you'll need to make an appointment. And please remove your hat inside the bank, we maintain certain standards here." His tone was dismissive, bordering on condescending. Robert remained calm, though his expression hardened slightly. "I understand you're busy, but this is rather important. I'm here about the quarterly review." "Quarterly review?" Thomas scoffed, finally looking up. "Sir, those are for our major account holders and bank executives. Perhaps you're confused about." He stopped mid-sentence as he glanced at the papers Robert had placed on his desk. The top document bore the letterhead of Heritage Trust's corporate headquarters, and right below it was Robert's name, Robert Chen, chairman of the board, Heritage Trust International. Thomas's face drained of color as the realization hit him. The man he'd been dismissing wasn't just another customer, he was the majority shareholder of the entire banking corporation, making an unannounced visit to assess local branch operations. The other customers in the bank had fallen silent, watching the scene unfold. Robert hadn't raised his voice or made a scene. He simply stood there, letting the weight of the moment sink in. "I think we should continue this conversation in your office," Robert suggested quietly. "We have quite a bit to discuss about customer service standards and equal treatment policies." As they walked toward the office, Robert removed his hat, not because he was asked to, but because he chose to. The small action carried a powerful message about respect being earned, not demanded. The other customers watched as Thomas, now visibly nervous, held his office door open for Robert. Many of them had witnessed the earlier dismissive treatment, and now they whispered among themselves, some hiding smiles behind their hands. What started as a routine branch visit was about to become a powerful lesson in humility, respect, and the danger of judging people based on appearances. And for Thomas Wilson, it would be a day he'd never forget, the day his preconceptions and poor judgment came face to face with reality in the most unexpected way. Little did anyone know, this was just the beginning of a series of events that would transform not just the bank, but the entire community's approach to customer service and human dignity. Inside the branch manager's office, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Thomas Wilson's hands trembled slightly as he pulled out a chair for Robert Chen, the man he'd just minutes ago dismissed so carelessly. The leather portfolio sat between them on the desk like a silent witness to what was about to unfold. "How long have you been managing this branch, Mr. Wilson?" Robert's voice was calm but carried a weight that made Thomas shift uncomfortably in his seat. 3 years, sir," Thomas replied, his earlier arrogance completely dissolved. "We've maintained good numbers, and our customer satisfaction rates have been." "Numbers," Robert interrupted softly, "don't tell the whole story, do they?" He opened his portfolio and pulled out several pages of customer complaints. "I've been receiving concerning reports about this branch for the past 6 months. Initially, I couldn't believe them. Heritage Trust has always prided itself on exceptional service. That's why I decided to see for myself." Thomas's face reddened as he realized the implications. "Sir, I can explain. Today wasn't a random incident, was it?" Robert continued, his eyes scanning the documents. We've had complaints about selective treatment, dismissive behavior, and customers feeling unwelcome based on their appearance." He looked up, meeting Thomas's gaze. "That's not what we stand for." Instead of immediately firing Thomas, as many might have expected, Robert did something unexpected. He pulled out another document, a customer service training program he'd been developing with his team. "I didn't come here to end careers, Mr. Wilson. I came here to fix problems." Robert's tone softened slightly. "Your banking expertise is solid, but somewhere along the way, you've forgotten the most important part of our business, the people." Thomas sat in stunned silence, processing these words. The kindness in Robert's approach, especially after how he'd been treated, was a powerful lesson in itself. "Starting next week, this branch will be part of a pilot program," Robert explained, spreading out the training materials. "We're going to transform how we approach customer service, and your branch will lead the way. That is, if you're willing to learn and change." The irony wasn't lost on Thomas. The very man he'd judged based on appearance was now offering him a chance at redemption. Outside the office, customers continued their transactions, unaware that a profound transformation was taking shape behind those closed doors. Robert shared his vision for the bank, a place where everyone, regardless of their appearance or background, would receive the same high level of service. He spoke about his own experiences, including times when he'd been judged unfairly, and how those moments shaped his business philosophy. "Success in banking isn't just about managing money," Robert explained, his passion evident in his voice. "It's about managing relationships. Every person who walks through those doors has a story, dreams, and aspirations. Our job is to help them achieve those dreams, not judge whether they're worthy of our time." As the conversation continued, Thomas found himself seeing his role in a completely new light. The metrics he'd been so proud of, the numbers, the transactions, the accounts, seemed hollow compared to the human element he'd been missing. Robert stood up, preparing to leave. "I'll be back in a week to start the training program. Until then, I want you to do something." He handed Thomas a simple notebook. "Sit in the lobby for an hour each day. Watch our customers. Learn their stories. Write down what you observe. Can you do that?" Thomas nodded, clutching the notebook like a lifeline. As Robert walked toward the door, he turned back one last time. "Oh, and Mr. Wilson? That hat you asked me to remove? It was a gift from my daughter. She bought it for me when she got her first job, at a small bank branch very similar to this one." Sometimes the things we dismiss most quickly carry the deepest meaning. With those words, Robert left the office, leaving Thomas with much to contemplate. As he watched through his office window, he saw Robert stop to help an elderly customer who had dropped her purse, chatting with her warmly as if he had all the time in the world. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes about the kind of leader and person he was. The day's events had set in motion a chain of changes that would ripple through not just Heritage Trust Bank, but the entire community. For Thomas Wilson, it was the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about banking, leadership, and human dignity. The following week brought changes that nobody at Heritage Trust's local branch could have anticipated. True to Robert's instructions, Thomas Wilson spent an hour each day sitting in the lobby, observing customers with his notebook in hand. At first, the staff exchanged puzzled glances, wondering if their manager had lost his mind. On his third day of observation, Thomas witnessed something that would stay with him forever. A young construction worker walked in, covered in dust from the nearby building site. The teller, following what she thought was proper protocol, asked him to wait until he was more presentable. Thomas was about to return to his notes when he noticed the man's expression, a look he had seen countless times before but had always chosen to ignore. "I just worked a 12-hour shift," the construction worker explained quietly. "My daughter's tuition is due today, and I promised her I wouldn't be late this semester." The pride and determination in his voice cut through all the presumptions Thomas had held about proper banking attire and appearance. Before the teller could respond, Thomas stood up and walked over. "Please, come to my office. We'll take care of your daughter's tuition right away." The surprise on both the workers' and tellers' faces mirrored his own internal transformation. During their brief meeting, Thomas learned that the man, David, had been working double shifts to put his daughter through nursing school. His calloused hands and dusty clothes were badges of his dedication, not marks of unworthiness. That evening, Thomas filled several pages in his observation notebook, his hands shaking as he wrote about how wrong he had been all these years. The next morning, an unexpected visitor arrived at the branch, Robert Chen's daughter, Alice, who had been appointed as the training program coordinator. She carried herself with her father's same quiet confidence but added her own touch of warmth and approachability. "I heard about what happened yesterday with the construction worker," she said during their first meeting. "Dad was right about you, Mr. Wilson. You're ready to learn." The training program Alice introduced was unlike anything the bank had ever seen. Instead of focusing solely on procedures and protocols, it centered on human connection. She brought in customers from all walks of life to share their banking experiences, both good and bad. One elderly couple's story particularly struck Thomas. They spoke about feeling invisible in banks, how they'd been brushed aside because they only maintained a modest savings account. "Money shouldn't determine a person's worth," the wife said, her words echoing Robert's message from the week before. Alice's training sessions often ended with practical exercises. She had the staff switch roles with customers in simulated scenarios, helping them understand the vulnerability many people feel when discussing their finances. Thomas participated fully, surprising his employees with his newfound humility and willingness to learn. During one session, a staff member asked about the bank's dress code policy. Alice smiled, remembering her father's red hat. "The real dress code," she explained, "should be in our behavior, how we treat others, how we listen, how we serve. Everything else is just packaging." Word about the changes at Heritage Trust began to spread through the small town. Customers noticed the difference in how they were treated, regardless of their appearance or account balance. The construction worker, David, had told his daughter about his experience, and she shared the story with her nursing school classmates. Soon, more young students began opening accounts at the branch. Thomas kept his observation notebook close, filling it with insights that would have seemed trivial to his former self. He noted how a simple smile could change a tense interaction, how taking an extra moment to listen could reveal the real story behind a transaction, and how every customer had something to teach him about banking and life. 1 month into the training program, Thomas received an email from Robert Chen. It was short but meaningful. "I hear good things about the changes at your branch. Keep watching, keep learning, keep growing. Sometimes the best leaders are those who aren't afraid to start over." As Thomas looked out over the lobby that afternoon, he saw more than customers waiting in line. He saw stories waiting to be heard, dreams waiting to be supported, and trust waiting to be earned. The branch's numbers were still important, but they now told a different story, one of human connection and genuine service. The transformation wasn't complete, but something fundamental had shifted. The same walls that had once echoed with whispered judgments now resonated with warm greetings and genuine conversations. Thomas realized that Robert's surprise visit hadn't just saved his career, it had given him a new perspective on what it truly meant to be a banker, a leader, and a human being. As autumn turned to winter, the transformation at Heritage Trust's local branch faced its first real test. The morning started with an unexpected visit from Regional Director Philip Baker, known throughout the banking circuit for his rigid adherence to traditional banking practices and impressive profit margins. Philip hadn't heard about Robert Chen's involvement or the new training program. He'd simply noticed the branch's unusual pattern of longer customer interaction times and was there to correct the inefficiency. Thomas was in the middle of helping an immigrant family navigate their first home loan application when Philip stormed into his office. The old Thomas would have immediately dropped everything to attend to his superior. Instead, he politely asked Philip to wait for 15 minutes while he finished with his customers. "Mr. Wilson," Philip said, his voice tight with disapproval, "I've looked at your numbers. Customer interactions are taking 23% longer than our regional average. This is unacceptable." He glanced dismissively at the family leaving Thomas's office. "We're running a bank, not a community center." Thomas took a deep breath, thinking about his observation notebook, now filled with stories of lives changed through genuine banking relationships. "Would you like to see something interesting, Mr. Baker?" he asked, pulling out the branch's latest customer satisfaction scores and new account statistics. The reports showed something remarkable. While interactions were indeed longer, the branch had seen a 40% increase in new account openings. Customer satisfaction scores had shot up, and most surprisingly, deposit amounts had grown significantly. People weren't just banking at Heritage Trust anymore, they were bringing their entire family's financial lives into the institution. "These numbers tell only part of the story," Thomas explained, leading Philip to the lobby. "Watch this for a moment." They observed as David, the construction worker from a few weeks ago, walked in with a young woman in nursing scrubs, his daughter. Starting her first job at the hospital, Thomas explained quietly. "She insisted on opening her account here because of how we treated her father. She's brought 5 of her colleagues with her this week alone." Philip frowned, about to speak, when another scene unfolded. An elderly customer who used to barely speak during transactions was animatedly discussing her grandchildren's college fund with a teller. The teller, instead of rushing through the transaction, was taking notes and offering suggestions about education savings plans. "This is all very touching," Philip said, "but sentiment doesn't drive profits. We need to focus on efficiency and—" "Pardon me," a familiar voice interrupted. Robert Chen stood in the doorway, this time wearing a business suit but still carrying his daughter's red hat. "I believe we need to talk about the future of banking, Mr. Baker." The color drained from Philip's face as he recognized the chairman of the board. Robert had been quietly monitoring the branch's transformation, and his timing couldn't have been better. "Your concern about efficiency is valid," Robert acknowledged, "but our definition of efficiency needs to evolve. True efficiency isn't just about speed, it's about building lasting relationships that grow over time." He pulled out his tablet and showed Philip the bigger picture. Families who had previously only held basic checking accounts were now trusting the bank with mortgages, business loans, and investment accounts. The branch's loan default rate had dropped significantly because they truly understood their customers' situations. "The time we invest in our customers isn't a loss," Thomas added, finding confidence in Robert's presence. "It's an investment that pays dividends in trust and loyalty." As if to prove their point, David's daughter emerged from the teller's desk, proudly holding her new account documents. She waved at Thomas, saying, "My whole graduating class wants to bank here. They say it's the only bank that treats them like people, not numbers." Philip listened, his rigid posture slowly softening as he observed more interactions. The branch didn't feel like a typical bank, it felt alive, purposeful, human. He watched as customers greeted staff by name, as financial discussions transformed into meaningful conversations about goals and dreams. "I must admit," Philip finally said, "these results are compelling. But can this model be scaled? Can it work across all our branches?" Robert smiled, sharing a knowing look with Thomas. "That's exactly why we're here today. This branch isn't just succeeding, it's showing us the future of banking. Mr. Wilson has proven that banking isn't just about transactions, it's about transformations." As Philip began to understand the full scope of what was happening, his criticism turned to curiosity. He began asking questions about the training program, the observation notebooks, and the ways they measured success beyond traditional metrics. Thomas realized that this moment was bigger than just their branch. It was about changing the entire banking industry's approach to customer service. The lessons learned from his own transformation could help other bankers rediscover the human side of finance. As the day drew to a close, Philip asked to borrow Thomas's observation notebook. "I think," he said thoughtfully, "we have some changes to make across the region. Sometimes the best innovations come from remembering what banking should have been all along." News of Heritage Trust's revolutionary approach to banking spread quickly through the financial community. 2 months after Philip Baker's visit, the local branch had become a case study in modern banking, with Thomas Wilson and his team regularly hosting visitors from other financial institutions eager to learn their secrets. One snowy morning, Thomas arrived at work to find an unexpected group waiting in the lobby, a delegation of bank managers from competing institutions in the region. They had heard about the branch's success and wanted to see firsthand how a small-town bank had managed to achieve such remarkable growth while maintaining a mom-and-pop shop atmosphere. "The secret isn't really a secret," Thomas told them as they gathered in the conference room. He held up his now weathered observation notebook. "It's about seeing each person who walks through that door as a story waiting to be understood, not just a transaction waiting to be processed." Just then, they heard a commotion in the lobby. David, the construction worker whose story had helped spark Thomas's transformation, was helping an elderly man who had slipped on the snowy sidewalk outside. Without hesitation, Thomas excused himself from the meeting and rushed to assist. The visiting managers watched through the conference room windows as Thomas and David helped the elderly gentleman into a chair. Instead of immediately returning to his important meeting, Thomas sat with the man, called his family, and ensured he was okay. One of the visiting managers checked his watch impatiently, but Robert Chen, who had quietly joined the group, spoke up. "What you're witnessing," Robert said, "is exactly what makes this branch special. Every interruption is an opportunity. Every crisis is a chance to show our values in action." The elderly man turned out to be Mr. Lee, a retired teacher who had been banking with Heritage Trust for over 40 years. As he recovered from his fall, he shared stories about how the bank had helped him purchase his first home, send his children to college, and plan for retirement. His eyes welled up as he spoke about how the recent changes had made him feel valued again, not just tolerated. "Last week," Mr. Lee said, his voice trembling slightly, "my grandson asked me where he should open his first account. For the first time in years, I didn't hesitate to recommend Heritage Trust. The bank finally feels like it did when I first started banking here, like family." The visiting managers scribbled notes furiously, but Robert knew they were missing the point. "You can't just write down procedures and replicate this," he told them. "It has to come from a genuine desire to serve, to understand, to connect." As if to illustrate his point, Alice Chen arrived with the latest batch of training materials. She had been traveling to other branches, trying to spread the philosophy that had transformed Thomas's branch. But she had discovered that change couldn't be forced, it had to be inspired. "Each branch needs to find its own way," Alice explained to the visitors. "We provide the framework, but the heart of it comes from the team itself." She shared how some branches had started community advisory boards, while others had developed specialized programs for local industries. The common thread wasn't the specific programs, it was the commitment to treating every customer as a valued individual. Thomas returned to the conference room, apologizing for the interruption. But before he could continue his presentation, David stepped in, still in his work clothes. "Mind if I share something?" he asked. The visiting managers looked uncomfortable at first, but Robert nodded encouragingly. David told them how his daughter had not only become a nurse but had also started a financial literacy program at the hospital, with Heritage Trust support. The program helped patients understand and manage their medical bills, turning what was often a source of stress into an opportunity for education and empowerment. "This bank didn't just help me pay for my daughter's education," David said, his voice full of pride. "They showed all of us, that financial institutions can be partners in people's dreams, not just gatekeepers of their money." The impact of David's words was visible on the visitors' faces. One manager raised his hand and asked, "But how do you balance this level of personal attention with the bottom line?" Thomas walked to his office and returned with a graph showing the branch's growth over the past few months. The numbers were impressive, but he pointed to something else, a chart showing customer referral rates. "Our marketing budget has dropped to almost zero," he explained. "Our customers do our marketing for us. When you treat people with respect and genuine care, they become your strongest advocates." As the visiting managers left that afternoon, they had notebooks full of observations, but Robert knew that only some of them had truly understood the lesson. Real change wouldn't come from copying procedures or implementing new programs. It would come from bankers who were willing to see their role differently, as stewards of their community's financial well-being. Back in the lobby, Mr. Lee was preparing to leave, supported by his grandson who had come to pick him up. Thomas watched as the young man looked around the bank with curious eyes, taking in the warm atmosphere and friendly interactions. Another generation was discovering what banking could be when it put people first. 6 months after Robert Chen's first visit in his red baseball cap, Heritage Trust's local branch had become something of a legend in the banking world. But with success came new challenges that would test the very foundation of their transformed approach to banking. One particularly busy morning, a young entrepreneur named Peter walked into the branch. His small food truck business had become a local sensation, and several major banks had been aggressively courting him with promises of fast-tracked business loans and premium services. He had heard about Heritage Trust's reputation and wanted to see for himself if the stories were true. Thomas was in the middle of his daily lobby observation when he noticed Peter looking lost among the morning crowd. Instead of directing him to take a number, Thomas approached him directly. "Welcome to Heritage Trust. Would you like to sit down and tell me what brings you here today?" Over coffee in Thomas's office, Peter shared his story. His food truck, specializing in fusion cuisine, had grown from a single truck to 3, with local restaurants now interested in carrying his signature sauces. Other banks saw numbers and potential. They pushed fancy business plans and aggressive expansion strategies. But something felt off about their approach, Peter explained. "They talked about franchising before even asking about my recipes or why I started this business." Thomas listened intently, remembering his own journey from focusing on numbers to understanding stories. "Tell me about your first food truck," he said. "What made you start this journey?" Peter's eyes lit up as he shared how the business had begun as a way to share his grandmother's recipes, blending them with modern cuisine. Each sauce told a story of family traditions and innovation. His customers weren't just buying food, they were becoming part of that story. "That's exactly what banking should be," Thomas said, pulling out his observation notebook. "Let me share something with you." He showed Peter his notes from the past 6 months, stories of customers whose lives had been touched by the bank's human approach. As they talked, Alice Chen arrived for her weekly visit. She had been implementing similar training programs across other branches, but Heritage Trust was facing a new challenge. Larger banks were trying to copy their approach superficially, offering longer appointment times and coffee in lobbies but missing the genuine connection that made the original model work. "We need to protect what makes us special," Alice said, joining their conversation. "But we also need to grow and adapt." Peter's situation presented a perfect opportunity. Instead of just offering him a business loan, Thomas and Alice worked with him to create a community-focused growth plan. They suggested starting a mentorship program where Peter could help other food truck owners navigate the challenges he'd faced. "Banking isn't just about growing money," Thomas explained. "It's about growing communities." The idea resonated with Peter. Within weeks, he had not only moved his business accounts to Heritage Trust but had also helped establish a monthly meetup for local food entrepreneurs in the bank's community room. The space that once hosted boring financial seminars now filled with the aroma of various cuisines and the excited chatter of small business owners sharing their dreams. Word of this unique approach spread through the local business community. Soon, other entrepreneurs began approaching Heritage Trust not just for loans, but for connections and community. The bank had become an incubator of sorts, where financial services were just part of a larger support system. Robert Chen visited again, this time bringing news that would challenge everything they'd built. Larger banks were pressuring Heritage Trust to sell, offering substantial premiums for their rapidly growing customer base. "They see the numbers," Robert said during a private meeting with Thomas and Alice. "But they don't understand that our success isn't in our systems or procedures. It's in moments like these." He gestured to the community room, where Peter was teaching a group of aspiring food truck owners about mobile payment systems. Thomas thought back to that first day when Robert had walked in wearing his red hat. "We're not just banking differently," he realized. "We're building something that can't be bought or sold. We're building relationships that last generations." The pressure to sell wasn't the only challenge. Some longtime employees struggled with the new approach, finding it difficult to balance efficiency with personal connection. But Thomas had learned that the best training happened through example. One afternoon, he overheard a new teller apologizing to a customer for taking too long with a transaction. "Never apologize for taking the time to get it right," Thomas told them both. "In banking, like in life, the most important investments are the ones we make in each other." As spring approached, Heritage Trust faced its biggest decision yet. The board would soon vote on whether to expand their model nationally or remain focused on organic, community-driven growth. The success of their local branch had proven that banking could be both profitable and personal, but scaling that success would require careful balance. Through it all, Thomas kept his observation notebook close, adding new stories each day. What had started as a simple training exercise had become a chronicle of banking's return to its roots, a business built on trust, community, and human connection. The decision about Heritage Trust's future loomed large as spring flowers began blooming around the bank's entrance. Thomas arrived early one morning to find Robert Chen already waiting in the lobby, watching the sunrise through the large windows. This time, he wasn't wearing either his business suit or his red hat, just casual clothes that made him look like any other customer. "My daughter asked me an interesting question yesterday," Robert said as Thomas joined him. "She asked me what success looks like for a bank that measures itself by stories instead of just numbers." Before Thomas could respond, they noticed a commotion outside. Peter's food trucks had parked in the lot, setting up for what looked like a special event. The aroma of breakfast foods wafted through the bank's doors as early customers began arriving. "What's all this?" Robert asked, genuinely curious. Thomas smiled, opening his observation notebook. "Remember that mentorship program Peter started? Today's the graduation day for his first class of food truck entrepreneurs. They wanted to celebrate here, where it all began." The parking lot transformed into an impromptu food festival as the morning progressed. Each new entrepreneur had put their own spin on mobile cuisine, from traditional family recipes to innovative fusion concepts. More importantly, each had a story of how Heritage Trust's community-focused approach had helped make their dreams possible. Inside the bank, regular business continued, but with a festive atmosphere. Customers waiting in line were treated to samples from the food trucks, turning routine banking transactions into a community celebration. Even the most traditional banking veterans had to admit there was something special happening. During a quiet moment, Alice gathered the bank's staff for an important announcement. The board had reached a decision about Heritage Trust's future, and Robert wanted the local branch to hear it first. "We're not going national," Robert announced, causing a mix of relief and confusion among the staff. "At least, not in the traditional way. We're going to grow differently." He unveiled a plan that reflected everything they'd learned over the past months. Instead of rapid expansion, Heritage Trust would focus on creating community banking hubs, branches that would operate with significant autonomy but share the same core philosophy of relationship-based banking. "Each community is unique," Robert explained. We can't franchise humanity or mass-produce relationships. But we can create spaces where genuine connections thrive. The announcement was interrupted by David, the construction worker whose story had helped start this transformation. He rushed in, still in his work clothes, looking concerned. "There's been an accident at the construction site," he said, addressing Thomas directly. "Some of the workers don't have proper insurance, and they're afraid to seek medical care." Without hesitation, Thomas gathered his team. Within hours, Heritage Trust had set up a temporary assistance center at the construction site. They worked with local healthcare providers, many of whom were bank customers themselves, to arrange care for the injured workers. More importantly, they began developing a financial literacy program specifically for construction workers, focusing on insurance and emergency savings. "This is exactly what I meant," Robert said, watching the team in action. "You can't put this kind of response in a banking manual. It has to come from understanding your community." The day's events caught the attention of local media. As reporters gathered to cover the food truck celebration and the construction site response, they discovered a bigger story: how a single bank branch had transformed itself into a community cornerstone. Alice used the opportunity to showcase the real measure of their success. She introduced reporters to Mr. Lee, who was now leading a senior citizens financial advisory group, helping other retirees navigate modern banking. She showed them Peter's mentorship program and the construction site initiative. "Banking isn't just about money," she told them. "It's about mobilizing resources to help people help each other." Thomas watched as customers shared their stories with the reporters. Each one was unique, yet they all reflected the same theme: banking could be a force for positive change when it focused on human connections. Later that evening, as the food trucks packed up and the last customers left, Thomas sat in his office updating his observation notebook. What had started as a training exercise had become a historical record of banking's transformation. Robert joined him, picking up the red hat he'd worn on that first visit. "You know what this hat really represents?" he asked. "It's a reminder that sometimes the most powerful changes start with a simple moment of humility." The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the bank's windows. Outside, Peter was helping one of his men close up their food truck, sharing last-minute advice. Mr. Lee waved goodbye as he walked past with his grandson, who now worked as a part-time teller at the branch. "Success does look different when you measure it in stories," Thomas said, answering Robert's earlier question. "But somehow, it feels more real, more lasting." As they prepared to leave, Alice arrived with early drafts of training materials for the new community banking hubs. But these weren't traditional banking manuals, they were collections of stories, each showing how genuine human connection could transform both banking and communities. 1 year had passed since Robert Chen first walked into Heritage Trust wearing his red baseball cap. The local branch was hosting a community celebration, not just of their transformation, but of the countless stories that had unfolded within its walls. The bank's lobby had been transformed for the occasion. Peter's food trucks were serving their signature dishes outside, while inside, photo displays showcased the year's memorable moments. Thomas's observation notebooks, now filling an entire shelf, were open for everyone to read, each page telling a story of banking done differently. David, now a successful construction company owner, stood before the gathered crowd, sharing how the bank's support had helped him expand his business while maintaining his commitment to worker safety and financial education. His daughter, having graduated from nursing school, had helped create financial wellness programs at 3 local hospitals. "A year ago, I walked in here covered in dust, worried about a tuition payment," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "I walked out with more than a transaction, I walked out with a partner in my family's future." Mr. Lee, accompanied by his grandson and a group of senior citizens from his financial advisory group, proudly displayed their new community initiative, a program helping elderly residents protect themselves from financial scams while staying connected to modern banking technology. As Thomas watched the celebrations, he remembered his own journey. The arrogant bank manager who once judged people by their appearance had become someone who saw the human story behind every transaction. His transformation had inspired others, showing that change was possible at any stage of one's career. Robert Chen arrived with Alice, both carrying boxes of red baseball caps, gifts for every employee and regular customer. "These aren't just hats anymore," Robert announced to the gathering. "They're reminders that appearances don't define worth, that humility opens doors, and that true banking is about building bridges, not barriers." The celebration was interrupted by an unexpected visitor, Philip Baker, the regional director who had once criticized their inefficient approach. But this time, he came with news that validated everything they had built. "The Federal Banking Commission has been studying your branch," Philip announced. "They want to use your model as a template for community banking regulations. They're calling it the heritage approach, putting human connection back at the center of financial services." The announcement caused a stir, but Thomas noticed something more significant happening in the lobby. A young couple was quietly trying to speak with a teller about a mortgage question. Without missing a beat, he excused himself from the celebration to help them. "That right there," Robert said to the crowd, pointing to Thomas's retreating figure, "is why this works. We celebrate success without forgetting why we're here, to serve one story at a time." The young couple, it turned out, were first-time homebuyers, scared and overwhelmed by the process. Thomas sat with them, not just explaining mortgages, but listening to their dreams for the future. By the time they left, they had more than a mortgage application, they had confidence and a support system. As the day wound down, Alice gathered everyone for a final announcement. Heritage Trust was launching a non-profit foundation, funded by a portion of their profits, dedicated to promoting community-centered banking nationwide. The foundation would provide resources for other banks wanting to adopt their approach, but with a twist. "We're not selling a system," Alice explained. "We're sharing stories. Because banking isn't just about money, it's about the moments that money makes possible." The foundation's first initiative would be a scholarship program, inspired by David's daughter, helping working families pursue education and entrepreneurship. The second would be a mentorship network, born from Peter's food truck program, connecting experienced business owners with newcomers. Thomas stood up to share his own news. His role was evolving. While remaining branch manager, he would also travel to other banks, sharing what he'd learned about transforming banking culture. His first presentation would be at the National Banking Conference, where he'd once attended sessions about maximizing efficiency and minimizing interaction times. "But I won't be talking about systems or procedures," he said. "I'll be sharing stories from these notebooks, showing how banking can change lives when we remember its true purpose." As the celebration ended, Robert gathered the staff for a quiet moment. The red hat that started it all was now displayed in a simple frame on the wall, along with a quote, "Every transaction is a story. Every story matters." 1 year ago, I walked in here hoping to change one branch's approach to customer service, Robert reflected. Instead, we discovered something bigger. We remembered what banking was always supposed to be. Outside, the setting sun cast a warm glow over the bank's entrance. Customers lingered, sharing stories and dreams. Peter's food trucks served their last meals of the day. Mr. Lee taught a young child how to count change. David discussed business plans with a group of aspiring entrepreneurs. Thomas sat at his desk, opening a fresh notebook. The first page was blank, ready for new stories. On his desk, a framed photo showed the moment that changed everything, a simple red hat that taught a powerful lesson about judgment, humility, and the true meaning of service. The bank would close soon, but tomorrow would bring new stories, new challenges, and new opportunities to prove that banking could be more than just transactions. It could be a force for positive change, one human connection at a time.